Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everybody who pulled this event together. Whoa, I didn't know it was so packed. My new novel, I brought some copies that I'll leave over on the table, and if anybody wants to give some money to FASP for those. It takes place, actually, in Washington Square Village, where I've lived for 17 years, and it's a murder mystery that takes place, at NYU. Don't get too excited, because if you're trying to imagine who it is I knock off, because, in fact, it's a murder mystery where nobody gets murdered. But the narrator has a certain revelation under that willow tree in Sasaki Garden. So anybody who wants to remember the gardens as they are now, it may be of interest. But this is the piece that I contributed to this book. It's called Dancing Through the Village. Jane Jacobs' beautiful book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, notes that the life of a neighborhood is composed of movement, and I'm quoting, and although it is life, not art, we may fancifully call it the art form of the city and liken it to dance. An intricate ballet in which the individual dancers and ensembles all have distinctive parts which miraculously reinforce each other and compose an orderly whole. That's the end of the quote. Jacobs goes on to describe over several pages the sidewalk ballet of her block of Hudson Street, the intricate improvisations that she, her neighbors, the local school children, shopkeepers, late-night drunks, and early morning dog walkers participate in. I came to Greenwich Village as a dance scholar in the more literal sense of the term. I moved here in 1995 with my toddler son, and we began our own dance with the neighborhood. Like Jacobs's, it extended to Hudson Street, our early morning walks to PS3, I know you're another PS3 mom in the house, taking us past McNally and Sons Meat Market, amazingly still there, past the Pink Teacup and Condomania, now gone, and if I continued up Bleecker Street after dropping Leo off, past Nusrati Afghan Imports and the Biography Bookshop, also eventually priced out of the area. The astonishing mix of old-school Italian, quirky soul food, queer celebration, cultural eclecticism, and unapologetic bookishness that made this precisely the place I wanted my son to learn how to move through the world. And there was literal dancing going on. School trips to visit the Merce Cunningham studios, contact improv jams at Judson Church, breakdancing in Washington Square Park. Those more literal choreographies also gave a person the sense of just how much intellectual, aesthetic, and political experimentation could be accomplished through bodies in motion. There, in Washington Square Village, where we still live, we'd watch from our balcony the various dances taking place in the playground and the garden below, from the wacky shenanigans of the little people on the swings and slides to the quiet, contemplative movement of the older woman performing Tai Chi on even the chilliest of mornings under the willow tree. One year, there was a beautiful young man with long hair who sat in lotus position on those raised concrete slabs near the fountain. If you crossed through the garden and passed him, you couldn't help slowing down. I teach in the Department of Performance Studies at NYU. We don't actually distinguish so much between literal and figurative dances. I've choreographed and performed dances in my apartment, in the garden, and walking down the street, and I think the dance Jane Jacobs was describing is as compelling, conceptually, aesthetically, and certainly socially, as any pirouette somebody might do across a marley floor in a space designated for performance. A few years ago, I was walking down Mercer Street, down the block from our apartment. I was approaching the small dog run located near the NYU gym. And suddenly, I saw the great postmodern dance icon, Valda Setterfield, dancing. It took my breath away. Actually, she was just sitting there on a bench in the dog run, but she was sitting exactly as I'd seen her sit, both live and in video documentation, in the quirky, understated choreographies of her partner and long-term collaborator, David Gordon. Gordon, as well as other choreographers over the years, have staged Setterfield to expose her extraordinary expressive capacities as a dancer, which seem most evident in moments of stillness. Shortly after seeing Valda Setterfield in the dog run, I gave an introductory lecture on performance theory to a large class of undergraduates. I was trying to explain to them that performance theory teaches us not merely to look at what we already regard as performance with greater acuity, but to begin to question what it is that we understand to be performance. I told them, I saw Valda Setterfield dancing. I explained who Valda Setterfield was. I told them I'd seen her on Mercer Street. I told my students that when I saw her there in the dog run, there was this shock of recognition. I said I might as well have seen Baryshnikov leaping across the dog run. It was so powerful seeing her there. Jane Jacobs and the postmodern choreographers who emerged from this neighborhood and developed their art here were telling us something very similar. That an urban environment that allows people to move together, navigate each other, confront each other, protect each other, and sometimes appreciate one another's stillness is vital to our capacity to experience joy, security, excitement, and peace. Dancers in New York increasingly express their despair at the cost of studio rental, but even more worrisome is the way in which the larger choreography of our sociality is increasingly constrained, both economically and spatially. A few years ago, Mikhail Baryshnikov asked Yvonne Rainer to teach him a choreography, understated, mundane, and in its understatement, magical, that she'd originally created for Valda Setterfield. It was an interesting choice for a dancer known for technical virtuosity. A critic asked Baryshnikov why he was, quote, taking such an artistic risk at this point in his career. He seemed incredulous that the interviewer couldn't see the appeal. He said, "It's not a risk. To walk across the street is a risk." When I saw Valda Setterfield in the dog run, I watched her as discreetly as I could. It seemed strange that I was privy to this breathtaking dance and nobody else seemed to know it was there. After a while, I looked both ways, stepped off the curb, crossed the dangerous street, and went home. The real risk, of course, wasn't in crossing the street. The real risk is in losing sight of the importance of that dance and the space for it to happen. Thank you.